Very good morning, it's Penny Well, the Black Pen. The mind is very, very powerful, and conditioning is a real thing. From birth, your society, your church, your school, mainstream media, movies, music are constantly programming your mind into what to think. And one of the biggest conditioning outcomes that we've seen is this idea of race: black, white, Indian, Chinese, etc. Of course, we have differing physical attributes. I look different to a white person, of course. I've got darker skin, I've got a different texture, hair and beard, etc. In South Africa, in Africa, and probably in the rest of the world, it seems like black people cannot exist in the modern world without white people and even Asians. In South Africa, in particular, we've got almost half of the population, almost 30 million people that live on grants. That means to successfully qualify for a grant, you need to be earning under 3,500, I believe. For some grants, you mustn't be earning an income at all. They need to see that you fundamentally cannot survive on your own without assistance from the state. About 67%, I think, of our children, of course, largely black children, go to no fee schools, of which are those schools that get fed by the state. Of course, 90% of the population uses free healthcare, goes to free clinics, free hospitals, gets free medication, and last I checked, over 5 million RTP houses, free houses, have been built, largely, if not almost only, for black people in this country. The bulk of our tax comes from white people, and unfortunately SARS, the South African Revenue Services, does not fundamentally want to publish the racial demographics of taxpayers, because I know it would cause a huge uproar finding out how much tax is actually paid by white people versus black people. Because just off the top of my head, to pay personal income tax, which is a big chunk of our tax, it counts for the top three tax contributors. Personal income tax being one, value added tax, VAT, charged at 15% being a second one, and then the third one being corporate income tax paid by companies. I think there's about 200 and something, I checked, 200 and something companies in this country that pay over 80% of corporate income tax. The bulk of companies don't pay tax. They don't meet the requirements to pay the tax. They make too little. Value added tax is paid by everyone who buys stuff, of course. Of course. But there's a lot of goods in this country that don't attract VAT. Basic foods, bread, maize meal, rice, cooking oil, tinned foods. There's no VAT on that stuff, which means for the bulk of the poor, the bulk of the stuff they buy has no VAT attached to it. Then there's personal income tax. You begin paying personal income tax once you earn above 6,700 Rand or more. And mind you, the average person in this country earns 3,600. Working, the average working person. The bulk of black people earn about 3.6 or less, which should tell you that they don't meet the threshold for paying personal income tax. The scariest stat, of course, is that the top 10% of earners in this country earn 7,300 Rand or more per month, which means 90% of people earn less than 7,300 per month. Like I said, from a racial perspective, the bulk of blacks are not paying tax. There's a group at the top, maybe the top 10%, 15% of black people pay tax, the rest don't. Black people in the modern world have become dependent on white people. And you can blame apartheid, of course. You can blame colonization, of course. And they valid because these guys came with these modern systems we have now. The money system with the South African Reserve Bank, insurance companies, the schooling system, this modern economy we have, which is plugged into the rest of the world. Africans in the South here, of course, weren't plugged into the rest of the world from a trade perspective. We weren't trading with the East. We weren't trading with Europe. We weren't trading with the Americas. We were trading probably amongst ourselves, basics, cattle, goats, sheep, maybe some grains as well, and maybe some skins and some metals. to make weapons like spears and plows, for farming. That was about it. I hear a lot of black people speak about how back in the day we were pharaohs, we were kings and queens. Such a funny thing to hear because it's not true. Very, very few people were kings and pharaohs and queens. Everyone else was either, if you're a minority, advisors to these people, or you were part of the elite. A big chunk was obviously part of what we'd call the working class today. And then the rest were peasants or slaves or just subsistence farmers. Very few people were kings and queens. The rest of us, even if you look at the South African story, you look at the Zulu kingdom, you look at the Sotho kingdom, you look at the Bedis and the Vendas, we can count the people that were kings and queens in these spaces. The rest of the people were not. So chances are you're not a descendant of royalty. It's a lie. Number two, when they say, civilization started in Africa and we used to have universities in Timbuktu, and if you look at the pyramids, those were very few people and that was isolated. It wasn't for everyone. And on top of that, when you want to assign yourself to the greatness of other people, when you haven't done anything, I can literally and say I'm a South African, so all South African creations and discoveries and successes are mine. They're not. Elon Musk being in America and building a Tesla, building a SpaceX, building PayPal, that's not my success. I'm not related to Elon Musk. He's not my family member. He's not giving me money. I don't have his skill set. So how can I claim his greatness? Or come to South Africa and you look at a Patrice Motsepe, who is a dollar billionaire. Just because he's black now, I must carry his success. It's not my success. When I'm struggling, I cannot call Patrice to help me. I do not have his skill set or his network. When you want to speak about the greatness of your forefathers who owned farms and cattle and livestock, what does that do to your mind? Living in a past where you did not exist and where you fundamentally cannot do that again. Because if they could do that then, why can't you do it now? No, but it's the system, But you guys were educated, you had universities and you were the masters of civilization. Why can't you build your own homes? Because you build pyramids, apparently. I really think for modern black people, and I don't like this racial thing because I'm a non-racialist and I hope we can dismantle this race agenda because the truth is most white people are average. Historically, again, like I said with black people, most white people didn't invent anything. They didn't travel to anywhere. It was a handful of white adventurers and explorers and colonizers and killers and inventors that gave white people the superiority, but it wasn't theirs. It's like me claiming the Moors back in the day, or the Egyptians, like I said. It's not my greatness. Chinese people can speak about Mao and they can today speak about Xi Jinping, but the bulk of them are just peasants, just workers. North Korea has got the Kim family. They are family and they have advisors, of course, and soldiers, but the bulk of North Koreans are just mere workers. So when you want to claim greatness that is not yours because you're not linked to it, it's pathetic. Black people today cannot eat without white people. They need white people for tax to take care of their social welfare. They need white people for jobs because they're dependent on white people for money. They need white people and their construction companies to build the roads, to build the bridges, to build the homes, to build other infrastructure. We need white people with their alphabet system and their schools to document even African history. We have not documented African history in our own ways. We don't have it. You can say white people didn't invent books and writing, it's fine, but they brought it here and we have assimilated to that. And yet a lot of black people want to chase white people away from here. The same black people whose dreams are to get a good education, a white education, of course, to go and get a good job from a white institution, of course, and then to move to the white suburbs because black people have not been able to build their own neighborhoods and cities on land. They have not been able to gentrify their own townships and build them into cities. They're waiting for white people to come and do those things. Or Asians, because Asians have been on the rise in this country. The Indians and the Chinese are moving. Some of them were colonized like black Africans. Some of them were beaten and turned into slaves like black Africans, and yet they've realized that, guys, we lost and we need to re-strategize and we need to become great. And black people are still blaming the whole world and complaining. And in South Africa in particular, we've graduated from blaming whites and blaming Asians, and today we blame our fellow black Africans who come into South Africa. Those black Africans obviously don't have great white people like we do in South Africa, so they gravitate to where the greatest white people are, which is here in South Africa. You move from the villages to go to the towns where there's better whites. Even there, it's not good enough. You want to move from the towns to the cities where there's even better whites. It's a tragic state of affairs, and I see a lot of cognitive dissonance, the clashing of ideologies and beliefs where black people want white people to leave. But when white people leave a town, when they leave a country and they move somewhere else, black people want to follow them because that's where the progress and the civilization is. Black people have not been able to create their own Silicon Valleys, their own major cities, their own huge institutional buildings and infrastructure. I'm talking as a people. Even Aliko Dangote in Nigeria has gotten Chinese people to help him build his cement factories, his oil refinery, his sugar plants. It's a tragic state of affairs, and it's a conversation we need to keep having because something needs to happen. Number one, we need to dismantle race, politics, and black people need to understand that they're just as average as white people. And the issue was just certain white leaders that gave the rest of white people an upper hand. And then black people in the modern world, at least, need to assimilate to white civilization in the West and maybe even in the East. Failing which, you need to go back to the villages and live like our ancestors. And if you want to build your own progression, go and borrow, of course, from the whites and from the Asians, but constantly go home and build your own things and stop chasing after other races that you claim to hate when you actually fundamentally don't. You actually love them very much and you worship them. Penuel the Black Pen, very difficult conversation, and I look forward to reading some of your comments on this as well. Cheers.